right. Day 4. As usual, I've told a few more people about it, so we'll see if anybody stops by. And otherwise, I will be either riffing on whatever I want to talk about or reflecting on how to actually make the container into something. So, anybody who would like to ask a question can do that. Otherwise, I'll start thinking about probably the Metamodern presentation I'll be doing on Metamodern religion on Friday. To start out with, anyway. So the next Metamodern presentation I'm going to do for 52 Living Ideas, a meetup group online, is on Metamodern religion. And I have at least 2 main points in mind, maybe 3. One of the main points is that among Metamodern circles, some people have this idea of creating a Metamodern religion. I think the idea of creating a new religion is like extremely, extremely difficult. It seems unlikely that it will catch on much and go mainstream. So I've seen some very interesting theoretical layouts on what metamodern religion would look like. And unfortunately, I would say, so far they all look extremely complicated, esoteric, highly abstract, um, just completely inaccessible to um, most people. And I would say it's something like, Esperanto is an artificial language designed, and it's designed to be as easy to learn as possible so that everybody can learn it in common and have a common language. But it never caught on. Practically nobody learns it. Um, and it really is genuinely easy to learn. I mean, imagine a religion that not only has to try and get itself up from nothing, but it isn't accessible. It's abstract. It's trying to make it on the strength of like a bunch of complicated abstract ideas. On the other hand, and this is maybe the second point, I do see some potential for a metamodern handshake with pre existing religions. And if metamodernism is capable of shaking hands with religions, let's say one by one, can it then act as a sort of intermediary to facilitate handshakes between religions? In which case, could it potentially decrease friction between religions, increase harmony between groups, and lead to a more stable, prosperous um, society where we spend our resources on making each other's lives better rather than worse in one way or another? So, how could metamodernism shake hands with a religion? When I think of religion, I tend to think of the 3 Abrahamic religions, Hinduism and Buddhism. However, I do also tend to think of this sort of materialist philosophy. It's not a religion, that's true, but when people have no religion, a lot of them are drawn to this philosophy, and I don't think that's an accident, because in some ways it does function as a substitute, in some ways. And what that means is it's perfectly reasonable to say that people relate to it in a religious like way, sometimes in some ways. And maybe it's just as a Canadian psychologist, Jordan Peterson, says about religion, is that religion deals with the fundamentals, the deepest layer of whatever informs your meaning making, your value judgments. If the deepest thing you have is a story about how a god made the world, then that'll make sense. But if the deepest thing you have is a best attempt so far at grounding a model of the past, present, and future in science, and that's the foundational level, right? And based off of that, you start to put together a philosophy and you build from there. And in that sense, you could say that we're treating the materialist philosophy in some ways like a religion. And so I think that somebody who thinks in this way we would want to include them in a conversation between religious people is basically the point. And likewise, we'd want to think about how can metamodernism handshake with religions, and also how can it handshake with other philosophies that act as the fundamental ground on which people build their perspectives and philosophies. And maybe there's a similar answer for the three Abrahamic religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, something like scientific materialism. Um, obviously there are many, many other religions, but I've tried to name the ones that seem biggest. Probably, the right and wonderful best answer will account for all of them. But, let's say, just to start out with, I'm coming from an American context. I'm more familiar with Christianity and a little bit more of the Abrahamic religions and a little bit of Buddhism. We can figure out the details later, but first step is on the handshake with at least a handful of religions. So before I talk about that, I just want to notice if I'm reading this right, there's a couple of people here. If you'd like, feel free to ask any question you like in the chat about metamodernism in general, the metamodern religious thing I'm talking about right now, um, or sort of the container. Like, what could this shelling point of a group of a video call sort of come to be? And if you don't have questions, I'll just keep going on about metamodern religion until somebody or something gets me going some other way. So, how do we get a handshake with, let's say, Christianity? Or it could be Hinduism. But let's start with Christianity. I know Christianity best. The idea is one, avoid horrible mistakes. And in this case, that means something like avoid heresy. One of the problems with trying to come up with a new metamodern religion is every other religion already has an explanation for why it will inevitably be wrong. So that's not helpful. And if you try to come along with a whole bunch of new doctrines that are just already established as heresies according to other traditions, then that's not a very good way to get off on a good foot, on a how to start things off well with people. So first off, we say, look, Christianity, we take seriously that you don't like heresy. We take it seriously. It's not the highest thing we care about more than anything else, but we take it seriously. And we try to think about what part of our perspective and philosophy genuinely jives with your thing. Like some parts of it probably are heretical. But which parts of it genuinely go along with your thing, are aimed in the same direction? I mean, metamodernism is an attempt to bring culture more together. And when we're more together, act as a much more efficient cultural unit as a species and succeed in our environment. Do religions overlap with that? Probably to some degree. Religions have to be practical to some extent. And even if we put aside the practicalities and say, yeah, the religions are pointing at deep truths about the universe or something, well, there's some overlap between cutting edge cultural understandings about how group dynamics um, display the same kind of swarm intelligence out of which individuals are composed. Um, So I think there's some promise on the idea that we can find some pretty decent common ground with all of the religions. And so we'll say, look, Christianity, here is our take on how metamodernism and Christianity could go together as well as possible. We've taken out all the heresy. We've emphasized, commonalities, similarities, things we're trying to pursue together. And we fleshed that out according to the particular ideas of Christianity, principles, and the works, the scriptures, and so forth. I would say to do the same thing with Hinduism, for example, but I don't know the Hindu scriptures, the Vedas, I think they're called. As a Christian, I do have some familiarity with the Christian scriptures. I was raised Christian, and I can see all kinds of ways to combine metamodern philosophy with the Christian perspective. And in fact, in the last call here, I spent like half the time answering somebody's questions about like heaven and hell and stuff, and ended up discussing many ideas that do indeed resemble Christian principles. And in fact, it has been in my discovery and exploration of metamodernism that I've come across things that I recognized from my Christian upbringing. And I was like, oh, that random doctrine that I ignored or dismissed or assumed wasn't about anything of particular importance is suddenly useful to me. Am I saying it's suddenly true? Well, I can't say that. But it suddenly has become useful. It's become relevant in my thought. And that was a little bit of a surprise. But it turns out, Christianity, long tradition, trying to talk about big things, and some of the big players and thinkers in the tradition were geniuses, undoubtedly. And they spent thousands of years building on past ideas and coming up with new ideas. I mean, it would be pretty much impossible to have anything remotely like that and not have a certain amount of genuine insight work its way into the structure somewhere. So I've already created content. I did a 5-hour commentary on the Gospel of Thomas uh, once. I think it's under my lives here on YouTube. Um, so, I've got lots of ideas about how to do it with Christianity, and I have some ideas about how to do it with Buddhism because I have some familiarity with that paradigm. I have a few ideas. I have a little bit of an understanding of, Judaism as well because I've read the Old Testament. Uh, and since I was raised, Southern Baptist and Mormon, the Mormons like to think they have a special affinity with the Jews. I don't know if that's a fully reciprocal perspective, but they like to think that they're sort of adopted into God's chosen people. I'm familiar with a decent amount of the scriptures of Judaism and so forth. And, I know a little bit about Islam. And I have some ideas about meta modern integrations or handshakes with each of them, and a little bit with Buddhism. At the same time, I'd like help with all of those, even Christianity, on which I feel like I have some real experience. And I really would need lots of help with like Hinduism. I Part of the problem is my understanding of Buddhism and Hinduism are a little bit mixed up because I see them as both sort of touching on this idea of like the infinite in a certain way. So in the Abrahamic religions, science opens up your world. At least that's what happened to me. I grew up religious. I thought the world was 6,000 years old. I thought the stars were just there for fun. And then, I got into science and the whole world, oh my goodness, 14 billion years old, and so many patterns and principles and knowledge and the technology and just so much about it that was amazing. But with Buddhism and Hinduism, that's not that way. If you convert from Buddhism and or Hinduism to science, so to speak, your world suddenly collapses. Because 14 billion years, we emphasize, what an immense span of time. It's like, no, 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 no. To the Buddhists and the Hindus, and again, I'd like somebody to help me work out the nuances here, but as far as I can tell, for the Buddhists and the Hindus, they've already imagined like really, really, really long periods of time, and they've tried to theorize about the infinite. The Buddha people will be like, how long does this process take, Buddha? And Buddha will be like, imagine you rubbed a silk cloth on a mountain once every million years or something, and then think how long it would take to turn the whole mountain to dust. And it's like, that's a lot longer than 14 billion years, actually. Um, and that's where some of their ideas like reincarnation make at least a little bit more sense, even from a skeptical, rational perspective. It's like, okay, if we're dealing with literal infinite possibility here, not just a 14 billion or even a 50 billion year old universe, but the theory is that somehow things come back into being one way or another. Somehow it's longer than that, and it just keeps going on and on and on in the wheel of samsara. Well, in that perspective, you could say that reincarnation just happens by accident. You could just say, look, the right molecules bounce around for long enough, and there's just a version of you back again. And you know what? You're going to relive a lot of the same patterns. And in some sense, you could say that the way you act in your life is a pretty strong indicator of how the next version of you is going to act, and every version of you is going to act. And so the question is, can your pattern somehow find its way to escape? And in the Buddhist paradigm, that would mean nirvana, cessation. In the Hindu paradigm, I'm really not sure. Do you go to heaven? Do you become a godlike version of yourself? What's the point? What are you after here? And then in the Abrahamic traditions, you would say something like, you're supposed to, like go to heaven of some kind or be perfected in some way. So anyway, we work out the details. I've got some ideas about Christianity. Other people know more about the other religions. In each case, though, we're following the same sort of guiding idea. It's like we're avoiding heresy and other types of offense. We're not barging in and saying, here's what's wrong with you. We could, and we might even be right if we have the right insights. But we're not going to do that. We're going to say, hey, we're trying to shake hands with you. And we're not going to put spikes or anything offensive on our hand. We're going to do it with good faith and look for commonalities and look for ways to help your religion and its adherents get more of what they're seeking already. So if you have you're a devoted Christian, you have your prayer practice. How could the Metamodern handshake help you in principle? It'd be like, well, we looked at all the other religions and insights and knowledge, and we have a bunch of techniques that other people say help them with their prayers. And I'm not saying that explains or expresses how big of a deal this could be, but the point is there's a basic proof of concept. We can just look for ways to take the insights from other religions and systems and say, look, we understand what you're trying to do with your religion to some degree. We know that you want people to feel close to God, and there's lots of things people have used to do that. And we're being sensitive to your, desire to avoid heresy and so on, but we found several recommendations that, as far as we can tell, they don't contradict Christian doctrine. They're not a violation. They're not blasphemy. They don't require you to believe anything wrong or necessarily to believe anything at all. But your religion is seeking these things, and we've at least tried, We've at least tried to extend our hand for this handshake, with the premise being, we have tried not to offend you. We've tried to help you. And even if after that we fail, in both respects or in every respect, I still think there's something a little bit flattering. There's something about the good faith effort in and of itself. I want it to succeed as well. But even if it failed, a good faith failure is better than nothing. A good faith failure can lead to a good faith success. It's dangerous to do things without good faith, without careful preparation to make sure you're not going to shoot yourself in the foot or stab the wrong person in the back. But if you're working in good faith, I think things get a lot safer. You can act to some degree with impunity. If you're acting in genuine good faith, you have a license to act in a certain sense. And that might and then sometimes that means that you can give convincing and true and effective apologies as necessary because you've been acting. But those apologies work because it was a genuine mistake and you were acting in good faith. I think there's something powerful about the good faith effort here. So we extend this sort of metamodern handshake to the religions. We design it, we build out the sort of metamodern integration, ideally working with influencers and thinkers from each of the religions. And once again, I have some ideas for the Christians and the Buddhists, a little bit the Muslims, but really not much. I'm familiar with a number of Jewish influencers and speakers, but are they? I'm not. I'm trying to think of one. I don't think I know who would be sort of a great representative for the philosophy, of the religion in and of it for its own sake. Like I want, theoretically, it would be somebody who specializes in their religion to some degree, or I don't know, has engaged with the philosophy of it very seriously. A lot of Christians, they take it seriously in the sense of thinking their whole life and eternity and salvation depends on it, but not in the sense of like learning that much about it. So anyway, we find these people. Um, I'd like to speak with them personally and try to just do a first approximation of what it looks like to try to establish that shared ground. Check my assumptions about what is offensive and what's not, what's potentially helpful. And I think the other way to establish shared ground with any one religion and between all of them is to focus on pragmatics. It's you focus on what people act like matters, even when their religious theories don't say it matters. So, according to the religious paradigm, maybe the really important thing is just if you go to heaven or not. But even if that's what your denomination teaches, you're still going to act like you care if you starve. Um, and that's going to be probably true for all the religions, except for a few enlightened Buddhists who don't want to, who will, turn off the pain of starvation or whatever. But in general, the religions can connect more than they think. They're not as divided as they think. The postmodern perspective has caused us to think we're more divided than we are, because what we share in common, the shared environment, the need to coexist, that's a big deal. And what divides us is beliefs. Beliefs that look like, it would be extremely difficult to get any kind of mass change in belief. And so we've given up on the project. We're like, people are just going to believe in their thing forever, and sometimes that'll cause disasters. But it's like, no, you don't give up because you can't change their beliefs. You appreciate that it's not really that much about their beliefs. Like, this is Sam Harris in his emphasis. He's like, beliefs inform behaviors. People do the things they do because they believe things that point in that direction. And that's partially true. It was an important insight, and I think we've already integrated it. I think as a species, as a culture, we have understood that people's beliefs sometimes make them do things we don't like. We've wrapped our heads around that. We've got enough sensitivity to that difference built in now. And the correct balancing move at this point in time would be to go back the other way and to say, how much could we get along even if theoretically we shouldn't be able to? Even if our beliefs say we shouldn't be able to get along, could we do it anyway? And we're like, no, no, here's an airtight argument based on fundamental presuppositions that shows that you can't. And it's like, okay, well, airtight arguments and all that, that's very persuasive. But if we just checked in the real world, if we tried to shake hands and discovered that actually we did, and then we tried to do business and we did, and we tried to be neighbors and we did, where can we go with this? And the idea is, once again, you can unite the religions on pragmatics. They all care about avoiding dystopia, at least their adherents do. They all care about some kind of utopia or heaven or vision of what would their religion do if it were immensely successful, if it were maximally successful. Basically, every religion, I don't know, maybe Judaism is a bit of an exception, maybe Hinduism, not in the same way, I don't know. But in general, even if let's go ahead and throw them all in. We'll say all of them. All of them in their extreme success case would basically say the whole world believes the same truth. The Jews don't proselytize in the same way, but they say it's the truth. And then presumably they would want other people to believe the truth. So like there would be a unification of belief in the success case of each religion. And supposedly as part of that, they would achieve what? And the answer is some kind of utopia. Every religion, or at least the adherents, can express themselves in terms of the dystopia they see in the world that they wish their religion would solve, that it can solve, but people, won't receive it the right way or whatever. And so instead, we have all these problems. What are those problems? You ask all of these groups, and they're going to talk about very much the same problems. They have more in common than they realize. And we say, okay, what's your utopia look like? And there are differences here, but once we get down to what people actually do in this imagined, religious utopia, I think again you'll find a lot of commonality. Everybody, they want partially not to have their lives ruined by random things. They want, culture not to cause problems. They want culture to successfully stave off the problems that nature can cause. And they want culture to do a decent job of, teaching and bringing up new people and having citizens whose lives are good and not horrible. And then everybody kind of wants something like making each other's lives great. I'm not saying everybody has a burning desire to go around helping everyone, but everybody sort of wants to have a great life. And the ingredients of a great life are the products of us doing things for each other. So ultimately, the vision of religious unification or otherwise, the vision is quite similar in that if we get it all right, we'll all just not cause problems for each other and we'll help each other more effectively and we'll have significant improvements in quality of life and this kind of thing. And so the religions can have a lot in common on the dystopia front and on the utopia front. And that provides a lot of ground in common for us to say, hey, we're pursuing all these things in common. Do we have any handshakes we can make here? We've been putting together these recommendations for each of the various religions on techniques for, whether it's prayer or meditation or whatever it may be. And it turns out a lot of the best techniques are acceptable among just about any religion. You know, there exists no religion, as far as I'm aware of, that says that you're not allowed to, look at something and like watch your breath or like think about sending love to your loved ones. These are good techniques. They're not exactly strictly part of every tradition, but they could be recommendations. What I'm getting at is when we actually do the cross comparison work, we'll find a lot of the techniques are universally acceptable. And so, what does that mean? If we start to have Christians who are like, oh, yeah, you really buffed up my prayer practice with, technique 1, 2, and 3. And we have Hindus doing the same 1, 2, and 3 techniques. And we have Jews and Muslims, everybody doing the same few techniques. Not everybody, but representatives from each religion. Among those who have taken an interest in the whole metamodern handshake thing going on. We say, look, you all even can share some of your praxis in common, some of your practices. I know in theory that shouldn't matter. I know you're supposed to completely disagree with each other no matter what on the basis of logic applied to propositional statements in your doctrines. And also, I just don't believe you. I don't believe that that's what matters when you're all participating together, trying to get closer together, using the same techniques in many cases. All of these things that can't be like easily measured or proven, I believe nonetheless are very clearly major contributors to something like the amount of friction between groups with different faiths. And if we can provide unity along these supposedly irrelevant axes, it will turn out that they are not irrelevant. They are very relevant to the pragmatic concerns that we share in common. And so I think that, to put it in one perspective, is another piece of the shadow of the human dialectic. It's we haven't looked for insights and ideas where we've been told there aren't any. According to the religion and even to the analysis of the non-religious, the beliefs are sort of the important thing, and the beliefs say who can get along with who. And so we're going to take them at their word. They're the experts, and we'll work within that framework. I'm saying, no, do not take them at their word. They'll tell you they can't get along. I think they can get along anyway. But But we've systematically avoided looking in this direction because we have a story that says we won't find anything when we go to look. The story says we have to get them to drop their beliefs. This was the scientific materialist utopic vision. How do they do it? Eventually, everybody drops all of their beliefs and faiths and accepts rationality, and then we're united. It's like, yeah, that's not going to happen. Certainly not soon. And how long did we start to put this sort of more atheist thing to the test culturally? And we're already getting weird types of pushback that suggest that it may not even, grow and grow and grow and grow. And maybe in a few hundred years, everybody will finally be atheists. It's more like, I'm not sure your movement's going to grow for the next 20 years. It may not end up replacing the religions. And of course, it's impossible to predict pretty much anything, with AI probably being really the biggest thing that determines the shape of any reasonably distant future. But anyway, until then, we have a chance to try to shape things such that we do our best job at handling the meta crisis, including AI and other problems. Will we do a good enough job? I don't know, but we could at least devote our resources to the problem. And so the whole metamodern religion angle, metamodern religion, metamodern dialectic, drama, literature, ritual, all of these things are ultimately united under the metamodern umbrella. All of them are united under the whole meta crisis problem. They're all sort of pointing in the same direction that says, if you really think one crisis is the one that is the most important, you could go work on that one thing. And if you're exactly right, maybe that's the best strategy. But most people say different answers, and most people say that if they went and worked on the biggest crisis anyway, it still wouldn't help. So we're inclined to look for alternatives. And the alternative is something like, let's not try to solve one problem at a time. Let's try to solve all of the problems all at the same time with the one common denominator, us. Unintegrated us. Culturally, fruitfully productive us with so much wisdom produced around the world. And we haven't even put it together as a species yet. We've only recently had the international connections, the internet, the access to digital libraries and this kind of thing to be able to put these together. So I'm a little bit making it sound like we've dropped the ball. Actually, we've only just got here. Victor's spam account, hilarious. Thank you, Victor. So if we skill up in coordination, solving the coordination problem as a species, not solving it 100%, just leveling up, then we'll be a better coordinated version of ourselves that can address each of the various crises in turn and do whatever a better coordinated version of us does. And you can't say exactly what that will be, but you can say pretty reliably, if we're better integrated, we're going to come at it with better competence. And so certain parts of the problem will just solve with our greater intelligence and coordination, just like that. Will that be 10% of each of the crises, 50%? I mean, it depends on how much more coordinated we get. But in principle, if we got very coordinated, like half of all the problems could just evaporate, because like those are problems for an unintegrated species. They're not a problem for an integrated species. And then what? Maybe that frees up so much worry and resources that we then devote everything else to the rest of the really hard problems. And then maybe we actually, sort of Manhattan Project them, right? When things were desperate, we occasionally achieved great acts of coordination. They were just like, find me the smartest people within 1,000 miles, get them all in this spot, give them whatever money they need, and have them do something that has never been done before that will revolutionize the world and the way we look at scientific exploration forever. And they were like, done. Took a few years. They kind of did it with the moon landing. It's like, we are capable of these things. We've done them a few times, not even that long ago. But we normally don't do this. We normally look at our problems and then just don't put our smartest people on solving them. We normally just don't provide the resources where they need to go. So it's it's a Hail Mary sort of perspective. The pessimistic angle here is, yeah, it has to be a Hail Mary. Nothing else will work anymore. It's too late. Either we get it together in the next X years, or we don't get it together at all. The disaster hits, whatever crisis comes to fruition first, and we just degrade from there, and crisis after crisis lands, and we are just back to the Stone Age or whatever. I want to keep exploring this thread for now, but again, if anybody has questions, feel free to ask. That's part of the container design. Any question about what I'm talking about or metamodernism in general for now, and otherwise, I'll be continuing my explorations and riffs. So the pessimistic angle is that there's always a Hail Mary solution available to a species. Maybe that's wrong always. I'll say both ways because they both tickle in different ways. One idea, and maybe this is too anti-metamodern, one idea is what I just said. It's that in theory, anytime at all, the species could just spontaneously integrate and level up and make life better for everyone. Could have happened in the pyramid times, could have happened in ancient Mesopotamia. And we have thousands of years of evidence that it doesn't happen. Well, that's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is no, you can't really spontaneously organize like this. Um, we can spontaneously organize in the present day. We are in a special time in history. We have the philosophical, the cultural, the dialectic understanding, and the technology necessary, where all the tools are available to do self coordination with high efficiency and to justify it. We can explain why we're doing it. Maybe it turns out to be the same message as many, you know, wise and loving teachers of humanity in the past taught, and they come down to things like love. And it's like, that's fine. And also, this is not even a criticism. It's just clear you weren't trying to be precise with your language. When you were like, God is love, next verse, moving on. It's like, right, you've succeeded at whatever you're trying to do. That's fine. Well done. But you didn't lay out a detailed case for why this would work, why it made sense, why it was strategically important, why it was good for people who weren't especially spiritually minded or community minded. You didn't justify it for the selfish. You didn't do any of these sorts of things. So, if we actually do that, if love was the answer, but a very carefully designed type of love that only the few geniuses could appreciate, Jesus understood what he was saying, but nobody else did. Well, if we could say it precisely this time, using tools that were unavailable at the time, philosophical rigor, dialectical sensitivity and understanding, we can start to articulate the things more precisely than they were done before. And so, even if it has been tried in some sense before, this is a Hail Mary sort of event that might only be available to us. The sort of surprising, rapid, pseudo spontaneous self integration might only be possible because we're halfway set up to do it anyway. And we're just sort of continually dropping the ball because we have the tech, among other things, to do it, and we're not using it. What's this? Whoever is watching can spontaneously cohere. Yeah. So hey, I'll switch the thread, the riff thread over a little bit in this direction. Yeah, like I just started the 6 p.m. every day thing. I didn't put any planning or thought into it. I thought basically, if it's the same time every day, so much easier to remember. You don't have to remember which day it is, or is it tomorrow? Am I going to miss it this week or whatever? It's just any day, any time, drop of a hat on a whim. If it's around 6 p.m., it's on the YouTube channel. Beyond that sort of mimetic shaping, like the container is very much in development. And part of the idea is it's not really what scratch that. It's not part of the idea is this, but what you've written is interesting. Whoever is watching can spontaneously cohere. Yeah, I mean, part of the idea is at some point somebody knew about the dialectic for the first time. They told other people. Now there's like thousands of us who know. But how do you get that dialectical awareness to be not necessarily intellectually understood, but just embodied in the full organism? How it's spread to like a few thousand people now. Why doesn't it spread all the way? And that's the question. That's the question that comes back. Is very central to the coordination problem. And so the idea of a container like this is not that the whole world's going to log on and decide that they should suddenly cooperate, but that I want this to happen and I don't know how to do it. But I've done this. I've done this clumsy, not well planned thing, but I've done it. And even in the like great failure case, I what am I getting at? It's like in the great failure case where literally nobody sees it, okay, that doesn't happen. But in the mostly failure case where only a few people see it, but I've still tried to communicate and credibly acted out the signal of like, I don't know, but think we should act before we know. I think we're waiting to know to act, and I think we will die if we keep waiting to act until we know. We're not gonna know unless we find way faster ways to start knowing things. And those are dialectic, those are dialogical, and you don't get to know the answer before you act. And so one term I've thrown a little bit about mostly in my mind is metamodern dharma. Dharma is a Buddhist term that refers to sort of the way of living out the knowledge of the truth. It's like, what is the metamodern dharma? What is the way of being if you wanted to do that? And part of it is to act out your ignorances rather than think through your ignorances. So I've acted out that I think it's important to act without knowing the answer because I really want to know the answer. I really don't know it. I really want to figure out what to do. I decided that it's important to act before knowing. I've gotten that far. And then what? And the answer is I don't know, but I took action anyway. And like I've set things up to come back and bang my head against this wall one more time. Okay, how do we get us to coordinate? How do we make that happen? If everybody did what I just did, it would be easy. If a million people did what I just did, it would be easy for them to handshake with each other and say, "Oh, you're clearly trying to do the thing. I'm trying to do the thing. Hey, handshake." Um, if one person does it, which is what I've done, nothing necessarily happens, but that's okay. If I keep doing one-off things that fail, I'll keep banging my head against how do you coordinate doing them together such that it eventually spirals to something. And Romeo Stevens is a sort of rationalist Buddhist thinker. Yeah, exactly. That's for now, it's just show up and keep. I really think there's power in failing to answer the right question. As long as you're looking at the right question, it doesn't matter that you're failing. The fact that you failed means you're necessarily at least giving your attention to it. And I've wondered if the good is to find something like that at which it is good to aim, because if you succeed, it's good, and if you fail, it's still good. So you get credit just for aiming, and forgiveness is infinite because your failures are part of our success. But Romeo Stevens, sort of rationalist Buddhist thinker, he's talked about this idea of the super cooperator cluster. And he says that in game theoretical analyses, extremely cooperative agents can start to work with each other, and they're so much more efficient and powerful that you only need a tiny percent of the population before the thing explodes. You still need more than one. You still need the right initial sort of seed, let's suppose. But once, if we can act out the highly cooperative, highly efficient game that works so much better with, 1,000 people, and film instances of it and start to show it to people and give them new training data, new stories, new patterns, start to draw their attention to, what are we looking at that allows us to make these handshakes? And how are you not seeing the same opportunities in your life? And oh, look, now look where you are. You're in the position where you can see them, but other people don't see them. And so you reach out for the handshake and then you get snubbed. And look, now you appreciate the coordination problem. And partially because of the game theoretical reasons that a small number of highly cooperative agents can explode into success, and even more so because partially also we have things like this technology where if you get the right answer and you get it on tape, you can show it to 5 billion people. So we don't have the videos to show them because nobody's acting out the handshakes and the culture, partially because there's only a few of us trying to understand how to do it, and we're still figuring out how to handshake with each other impressively enough that it actually proves its worth. It would have been amazing if we started the Metamodern group and the first 5 people who arrived were just like, "Hey, how can we help each other do everything?" And then they just expanded on that and it like exploded and took over and became like the dominant paradigm. But that didn't happen. We're clumsily just trying to get this sort of thing going. Now this is impressive. The handshake, yeah. We're slowly starting to get this going, but I really think that it's a little bit like a spark. There's a real fiery type dynamic here. It's like we're sitting on top of thousands of years of dialectic processing that could have been done. We have the ability, the technology, the philosophical sophistication, the resources to like burn through thousands of years of that kind of thought in like a year, in the extreme case, let's suppose. We could chew through it in 100 years. The metamodern age could take forever, but I really think, as I think about it, there is potential for it to happen very fast. All the technologies in place that if you can capture the thing, you can distribute it. That is a huge, huge deal. Like that was not present for the entire history of humanity up until the past several decades. And, even 10 years ago, translating between languages was very difficult. Now we have the technology to spread the ideas to each other, but we haven't really seen that happen yet. We haven't seen like a single message sweep through the world population because no message has appealed to people in that sense. But the technology is there. And so if we can find the thing, capture the thing, whether that's articulating it or embodying it and recording the embodiment, it might not do anything, but if we get 1,000 people exploring what super cooperation looks like, why it's so much better to be part of a super cooperative team than to be trying to go at it alone or to be competing with your teammates. I do believe there's a better way of being that is so palpably impressive and attractive and beautiful that it like seduces people to want, you know, to recreate it. But I don't think we have it. I don't know where to point the camera. There's no scene playing out on the planet where I can say, "Hey, point the camera at that and tell everybody to imitate it because that would be amazing." It's like, who, where, what? Who's doing it? I don't know. Maybe this is how I find out. But if they're not doing it, somebody needs to do it. And if we don't know how to do it, because we don't, we need to fail at it courageously and persistently enough that we build on the failures and finally make it work. And although that has a little bit of an incrementalist shape, once we've got the thing and it's packageable, it's instantaneously mass distributable. And we think of problems like distribution and marketing usually, but if we're genuinely dealing with mimetically powerful ideas, the distribution shouldn't be the problem. If you could genuinely capture such an impressive scene of like conflict resolution or integration, cooperation, strategic efficacy of some group of people who had learned to interact in a sort of metamodern, hyper-productive, super cooperative, dialectically, you know, explosive way, you could just film it and be like, yeah, the distribution, the marketing takes care of itself if it's genuinely mimetically powerful. I've made some speeches and I've talked to some people, I've read some stuff, I've watched the videos. I'm not surprised none of it has taken off like wildfire, including my stuff. Like, I wouldn't expect every person who looked at that to be like, wow, I want to show that to the next person. But if you get something like that, distribution isn't a problem. With the technology in place, any idea that like had a, we learned all about this during COVID, the multiplication number. What was it called? R naught. Yeah, if the R naught is, 2, if we can achieve something with an R naught of 2, and the whole anyway, the point is, and then it doesn't need distribution. It takes care of itself. Um, I don't know. What is it? I'm starting. I get this sense. Um, I keep talking about if we could get the right spark, it could theoretically spiral. But it feels so distant. Like, it would feel a lot better to be talking about this kind of thing with some kind of proof of concept having actually happened. And all I have so far are, I'm learning about new ways to relate to myself and to others, and I talk to people. And I do find it personally extremely um, rewarding. I find it very effective in terms of the relationships are better. I'm a better friend and person, and I understand how to learn more from people than I did before, and things like this. That, however, is still not remotely on the kind of mimetic explosiveness we're talking about. So I guess, at some point you got to go from 0 to 1. And here we are still at 0. And talking sounds a little bit distant because there's never been a 1. Not exactly. But I really want to find people to sort of think through and live through figuring out the metamodern dharma together in some sense. I just, on some level, it's like, hey, there's me and you being you. And in theory, we could probably help each other at least somewhat. And we could also annoy each other a lot if we did it the wrong way. Can we figure out how to make this handshake work such that when two people trust each other to make this handshake, they can rapidly identify what they can do to help each other in mutually beneficial ways and then just call that wonderful and move on? What does that look like? What does it look like? I want to practice it with people. I want to Uh, start by talking and then what can we do for each other? It might involve dialogues, working on creating content together. Um, what would it look like if I let's say I had somebody, if I had somebody and they were like, "Cool, let's do the thing." It would be like, "Okay, let's list like let's like set a 2-minute timer and like list the things we want, each of us, and like let's look at each other's lists and just identify any of those we think we could help with. We might want to have a rule in place to avoid over committing people. This is an easy failure mode. Oh, now we have to do everything nice for each other because it's too awkward to say, yeah, I don't want to do these ones. We want it to be set up so that you can like have 10 promising things and then like cut every like 9 of them away and without ruining the one that you still want to do. So you have to have this idea built into it of something like, anyway, it could help to slightly design the experiment to avoid that kind of dynamic. But then we start working together. We start doing things. We have calls or collaborations or whatever it is we come up with. Maybe we support each other. It's like, I want to commit to an exercise routine and you just help like that. Like help of all kinds. If it is mutually beneficial, it's free. It's better than free. Um, you can never get enough of it if and only if it's mutually beneficial. So, and then just go from there, I guess. At that point, go from there and try to be like, how do we, what are we learning in this back and forth? What are we learning about how to do these handshakes? Why they don't happen? And then I guess just try out the ideas. That is a little bit the metamodern angle as far as I'm concerned. It's what I'm doing this with this 6 p.m. idea. It's like the ideas are not that well developed. And I sometimes feel like foolish talking about them in big picture terms, but I would feel much more foolish continuing to talk carefully about them for like months when just even getting 1 hour's worth of real contact and experience with the thing was sitting there in my lap as soon as I would take it. And once you sort of wrap your head around that shape of a thing, there's so many times when it's so much more valuable to say, throw out the theory, let me get even 1 hour of contact with the thing, and then I can do my theorizing if I want to. Except I'll probably have completely changed my perspective after even 1 hour. And then when you get that built in and taken for granted, you realize, there's so many things that I can like think about that in the past I would have thought about them for a while and then thought about maybe doing something if they seemed interesting. And now I'm just like, oh yeah, like half an hour or an hour of action on this would be the best way to explore it. Like, why even bother with the first hour of thought? Obviously, sometimes it's better to start with the thinking, um, but I do think this shape has something we're going to need at the macro scale in this time. Things are changing very, very fast. With AI, things are going to be changing much, much faster. At some point, it's going to be so fast that we can't track it anymore. And it'll just get faster. And we'll freak out. And if we survive, we'll eventually say, okay, life goes on somehow. And we'll put together the rules for, wait, how do we live in a world where we never actually know what's true? And we put them together. But if we're waiting forever, again, it's the same idea. Because things are changing faster, signals are getting more complicated, harder to tease apart. We're going to need to be able to take action without knowing what we're doing as a species. Like imagine a crisis rapidly coming to a head on the order of could be a few days, let's suppose. It's like we don't have time to come up with a good plan. So we're either not going to come up with a good plan and act anyway, or we're going to sit here trying to come up with a good plan until it's too late. So this is me meta enacting the principle of this metamodern dharma I'm trying to figure out is like at some point humanity is going to have to confront and then get over being able to think through things before acting on them, and maybe soon. And so I want to act that out and try to get a little bit of training data under my belt so I can build up some intuitions about how to do it, because I mean I'm still very fresh at it myself, but I think it'll be important. And I've already found, though, it's so freeing in some ways, though, and encouraging. It's like I can just act, I can just do, and like the failure doesn't hold me back in the same way because I already assume I'm going to fail. I just plan to build on the failure into success. Uh, I could go on about that for a while, but it is emotionally really liberating in a big way, too. And there's probably some macrocosm version of that where, like, What does it look like for the species to take a collective sigh of relief and feel that liberation? I don't know, but I like the microcosm macrocosm analysis. So it's 7 o'clock. I'll be doing this every day for the next while forward. Yeah, fail forward. Exactly. Thank you both, Chase, Victor, and whoever our mystery third person is. And maybe I'll see you next time. Oh, awesome. Yeah, I'll see you tomorrow, Chase.